Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone.
Authorities in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma say that an elderly man is in custody and facing numerous charges this week after he was accused of setting two homeless people on fire in what has been described as a terrifying and senseless attack. The disturbing situation began sometime after 6 a.m. on July 16th when a local resident named Corey Spencer was taking out some trash at his residence near the intersection of West Hefner Road and Northwestern Avenue. He had just stepped outside when he was met by a horrifying scene. It was a woman who was standing by a fence just outside of a nearby business. She was engulfed in flames from the waist up. Corey immediately rushed the woman inside and was able to get her into his shower where the flames were extinguished. Unfortunately, she wasn't the only victim. Moments later, Corey realized that a man who was with her was also on fire. He went back outside to help him as well, though thankfully his injuries were less severe. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, the man was taken to a local hospital to be treated for burns to his arms and legs, while the female victim was taken to a burn unit in critical condition. Despite their injuries, the victims were apparently able to give police details about what had happened to them. They explained that they had been sleeping on a grassy area near the fence where Corey had found them, when suddenly they were doused with something and set on fire. The woman said that she thought she recognized the person responsible, identifying him as 70-year-old Michael Ray Madison. The male victim later identified Madison as well through a photograph. According to reports, Madison was arrested after returning to the area of the crime. At the time, officers said they could smell a strong odor of accelerant on him. The 70-year-old has a previous criminal history that includes robbery and is now facing a number of charges related to this week's incident, including first-degree arson. Speaking about the awful incident afterwards, Corey Spencer told reporters, quote, "I was taking trash to the curb and saw the young lady just from the waist up on fire. Stuff you see on TV. I never seen something like that in real life." At the time of this recording, neither of the names of the victims have been released. It's believed that Madison knew the victims prior to the incident. However, the exact motive behind the crime is still under investigation.
Authorities in Norfolk, Virginia released a disturbing update in the case of an 81-year-old woman last week, announcing that her recent death at a local senior living facility was actually a homicide, and that her own daughter and grandson have now been charged with the awful crime. The whole thing started shortly before midnight on June 30th, when police were called to the Commonwealth Senior Living Facility on Poplar Hall Drive. They arrived to find 81-year-old Cleo Loizides, who was found unresponsive in her room there. Paramedics did their best to save the elderly woman. However, there was nothing they could do and she was pronounced dead a short time later. Initially, Cleo's death was classified as undetermined. However, upon closer examination, disturbing signs of trauma were uncovered. These included marks on the 81-year-old's neck that appeared to be consistent with strangulation. On July 9th, the case took yet another chilling turn when Cleo's own daughter and grandson, 53-year-old Heather and 24-year-old Clifton Cummings, were charged with her murder. According to police, Heather confessed that she and Clifton had planned to drive from their home in Indiana to the senior living facility specifically to murder Cleo. During the killing, she held her mother down, while Clifton allegedly strangled her with a strap from the bag he was carrying. As if this wasn't horrifying enough, it's further alleged that as the pair were murdering Cleo, Heather told her, quote, "Just let go, it's for the best." Understandably, staff and residents of the facility say that they were stunned and heartbroken to learn this new information. Friends of Cleo's described her as having a great sense of humor, but said that she was also very quiet and gentle. The 81-year-old was originally from Baltimore and had worked as a model and banker in the 1960s before meeting her late husband John. One of Cleo's friends, who was interviewed by local media, said that it hurt her to even think about what John would have thought about the tragedy if he were still alive, stating, quote, "I just know it would have been really sad for him to know their daughter did that." At the time of this recording, Heather and Clifton are both in custody and have been charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Authorities in Porter County, Indiana say that a local woman has been arrested in connection with a horrifying crime last week, more than 2 months after she allegedly killed her foster son after the boy begged a neighbor for help. The awful incident began sometime on April 25th when police were called to a residence in Liberty Township with reports that a 10-year-old boy was suffering a medical emergency. They arrived to find the boy in question, Dakota Stevens, unresponsive. He was rushed to a local hospital before being airlifted to another facility. Sadly, Dakota didn't make it. He was declared brain dead and taken off life support 2 days later. At the time of the initial response, police spoke with the 10-year-old's foster mother, 48-year-old Jennifer Wilson, who claimed that it was all a tragic accident. She said that Dakota was misbehaving and that during this he threw himself on the ground and was screaming. She claimed that she got on top of him and contacted his caseworker, telling police, quote, "I was laying on him and he was acting bad." She said that when Dakota was quiet, at first she thought he was acting. However, when she eventually got off him, she discovered he was pale. Following further examination, authorities determined that Dakota had brain swelling that was consistent with being deprived of oxygen for an extended period of time. His death was ruled a homicide by mechanical asphyxia. Just for reference, Wilson weighs 340 pounds, while Dakota was barely over 90. A neighbor of Wilson's filled in further alarming details about what had happened, stating that less than 30 minutes before the 911 call, Dakota had come running over to her house begging for her to adopt him. Dakota claimed that his foster parents were hitting him and he wasn't able to contact his caseworker. Police say they also found further injuries on the 10-year-old body, including bruising on his neck and chest. On July 12th, a warrant was issued for Wilson's arrest. The 48-year-old was found the following day in Berrien County, Michigan, and was arrested during a traffic stop. Wilson has now been charged with reckless homicide and currently remains in custody on a fugitive of justice warrant. Further charges are expected to follow.
Dozens of families have reportedly been left shaken and terrified this week after one of their fellow tenants at a New York City apartment allegedly set their building on fire during the middle of the night, then tried to stop people from fleeing to safety. The whole thing started shortly before 3 a.m. on July 16th, when New York City firefighters were alerted to a blaze at a 4-story apartment building in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood. Residents of the building had awoken to smoke and flames pouring from the hallway and one of the units on the first floor. Due to the intensity of the fire, a number of people were stuck on the upper floors, including one family who had managed to get outside onto a fire escape before discovering that they were trapped. However, even those who had been alerted to the fire right away found that they had to contend with a different obstacle. Upon navigating through the dense black smoke in the first floor hallway, a number of victims discovered that one of the tenants on that floor, later identified as 63-year-old Stanley Garcia, was holding the front door of the building shut in an attempt to prevent people from escaping. Thankfully, Garcia was pushed aside by one of the residents, allowing people to make it to safety. The 63-year-old had reportedly fled the scene by the time authorities arrived. Firefighters were able to extinguish the blaze within an hour. However, at least 11 people suffered burns and other injuries. At least 4 were hospitalized, including a 14-year-old autistic boy who was one of those trapped on the fire escape. 2 of the firefighters were also taken to the hospital with minor injuries. Based on witness statements, it's now alleged that Garcia deliberately set the apartment building on fire and was seen pouring some kind of accelerant into the hallway shortly before the flames first broke out. It's unclear why the 63-year-old did this, though one report we came across mentioned that someone had overheard a possible altercation between Garcia and another person not long before the fire. In statements to local media, a number of the tenants expressed their frustration with the building's management, saying that numerous complaints had been made about Garcia's behavior well before this week's incident, but that nothing was done. Speaking about their landlord, one of the tenants said, quote, "We've told him multiple times about the individual who set the first floor apartment on fire. We've told him he's sick, about the times he's come out with a hammer or screwdriver or whatever, and they always give us the runaround. Now he's set the house ablaze, and we have nowhere to go." It's also been reported that the 63-year-old has had at least 6 prior interactions with police for being an emotionally disturbed person, for not taking medication, acting erratically, hearing voices, and for speaking about harming himself. Garcia has prior arrests for criminal contempt, menacing, and resisting arrest. At the time of this recording, Garcia has not been arrested or charged in connection with this week's incident. Police say that they are still investigating, though they have identified the 63-year-old as a suspect.
Authorities in Newton County, Georgia, say that an elderly local man has been arrested and is facing charges after he allegedly shot and killed his own son last week, a crime which apparently took place in front of other family members and dozens of terrified witnesses. The whole thing started just before 7 p.m. on July 12th, when police in the city of Covington received a report about a shooting at a large property on the 8100 block of Lakeview Drive. Officers arrived to find 60-year-old Troy Eaton unresponsive inside of a building there. He had been shot and sadly was pronounced dead at the scene. After speaking to a number of witnesses, police were quickly informed about what had happened. They claimed that Troy had been in the middle of getting ready for a weekly fishing tournament that had been held on his property when his 85-year-old father, Wayne Eaton, had come into the bait shop. They claimed that Wayne had shot his own son. While no one seemed to have any idea what the altercation was about, Wayne was still at the scene when police arrived. Following a short standoff, he was successfully taken into custody on charges of malice murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Unfortunately, it appears that no information has yet been released about the motive behind the awful crime. In interviews with local media, Troy's children have said that they are still struggling to wrap their heads around the tragedy. They say that Troy was an extremely kind and hardworking man who was known for going out of his way to help others. He worked around the clock to keep his fishing business going, spending whatever free time he had with his children and grandchildren. Adding further heartbreak to the situation is the fact that the 60-year-old was apparently supposed to be getting married just next month. At the time of this recording, Wayne Eaton remains in custody. The situation is still under investigation.
Authorities in Muskingum County, Ohio say that a 34-year-old woman pleaded guilty to more than 24 charges last week after she spent years terrorizing local emergency responders with fake 911 calls. Crimes which they say not only routinely ate up valuable resources, but in one case resulted in another person's death. According to a press release distributed by the Muskingum County Prosecutor's Office, the problems began all the way back in 2020, when 34-year-old Keisha Kennedy began calling 911 for all sorts of non-existent emergencies. Most of these calls reportedly involved fake medical issues, in which Kennedy would pretend to suffer from all sorts of ailments. Each time, Kennedy would be taken to a hospital, only to be told that nothing was wrong with her. Unfortunately, even though they knew that she was faking, emergency workers and medical professionals still had to follow protocol. This meant countless responses from firefighters, dozens of unnecessary ambulance rides, and hospital staff needing to triage Kennedy every time she would be taken there. In total, authorities say that Kennedy falsely called 911 nearly 400 times and would often call multiple times in a single day. As you might imagine, Kennedy's abuse of the 911 system put incredible strain on local emergency workers, especially on the South Zanesville Fire Department. Sadly, this reportedly led to the death of at least one person. According to the press release, quote, ambulances and first responders transporting Kennedy for non-existent emergencies were unavailable to service those experiencing actual emergencies. For example, SZFD responders were unable to respond to a call involving a person unable to breathe because they were transporting Kennedy for a fake call. The person with breathing trouble later died. In another case, SZFD was understaffed for a fire due to personnel attending to Kennedy. In another example of Kennedy's shameless antics, the release detailed one of her many hospital visits. In that incident, which took place in August of 2023, the release states, quote, law enforcement officers responded to a report of a behavioral emergency at Licking Memorial Hospital involving Kennedy. Officers questioned Kennedy, and she pretended she was suddenly unable to stand or walk. After being helped into a sitting position on a bench, Kennedy pretended to be unconscious. She then pretended to wake up and told officers that she did not understand the meaning of being read her rights because she was disabled. As in Muskingum County, Newark law enforcement spoke with doctors at the hospital who confirmed that Kennedy was not disabled and did not need medical treatment or transfer to another hospital. While authorities stated that they believe that Kennedy suffers from a mental disorder that causes her to fake medical issues and symptoms, their frustration with how the situation was handled and their lack of ability to do anything sooner was obvious. Speaking about the case, Muskingum County Assistant Prosecutor John Lytle said in part, quote, obviously some type of check or balance needs to exist so that this type of abuse is more quickly reported by EMS to law enforcement, because 350 pointless ambulance runs is absolutely ridiculous. On July 12th, Kennedy pleaded guilty to felony disrupting public services, felony making false alarms, and 25 counts of misdemeanor misuse of 911 systems. According to reports, she will be sentenced at a later date.
Authorities in Winston County, Mississippi say that a man has been charged with 2 counts of murder after the bodies of his mother and girlfriend were found under chilling circumstances late last week. The case began shortly after 6 a.m. on July 11th when police received a call from a woman on Zion Ridge Road who said she had something unsettling to report. While taking out some trash, she had discovered clothing and bedsheets that did not belong to her inside her garbage bin. All of the items were covered in blood. Officers came and collected the evidence, only to be called back to the neighborhood several hours later. Just before 5 p.m., they were asked to conduct a welfare check at a home on the same street. When police arrived at the property, they found the doors locked, but were able to climb in through a window. That's where they found the bodies of Chancey Ware and Linda Daniels. While no further information has been released on the causes of the 2 women's deaths, authorities quickly determined that they had been murdered. They also identified a person of interest in the case, Linda's son, 37-year-old Carlos Daniels. He had been seen leaving the crime scene earlier the same day. A be on the lookout alert was issued for Carlos Daniels and his vehicle, and he was ultimately spotted and arrested in Scott County. He is now facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. At the time of this recording, no motive has been released behind the awful crime, though it's said that Carlos was already facing unrelated vehicle theft charges at the time of his arrest. The situation is still developing.
The residents of a small Alabama town have been left stunned and heartbroken this week after a local man allegedly killed 5 family members in a horrific act of violence, the victims of which included his wife and 2 of his own young children. Reports appear to contradict each other as to exactly when the incident began. However, what we do know is that Bibb County Police received a 911 call sometime on the night of July 18th. During that call, they were told that a child had been shot at a residence on the 1000 block of Green Tree Drive, located in the town of West Blocton. When officers arrived and entered the residence, they found 5 victims, all of whom were suffering from gunshot wounds to the head. 3 of those victims, all of whom were children, were pronounced dead at the scene, while a woman and 1 more child were rushed to a hospital in Birmingham. Sadly, they later succumbed to their injuries as well. Back at the crime scene, police arrested the alleged perpetrator behind the chilling crime, a 32-year-old resident there named Brandon Kendrick II. It's now been reported that the victims of the crime were Kendrick's wife, 24-year-old Kelsey Kendrick, their 2 children, as well as Kendrick's niece and nephew. None of the children's names have been released, but according to local media, all of them were under the age of 10. Kendrick's parents were also home at the time the shooting took place. However, they were apparently unharmed. At the time of this recording, Kendrick remains in custody and has been charged with 4 counts of capital murder of a child under 14 years of age, and 1 count of capital murder in the killings of 2 or more people in one act. However, the circumstances that led up to the shootings, as well as the motive behind them, still largely remain a mystery. Speaking about the crime in an interview, Bibb County Sheriff Jody Wade discussed the horror of the situation, stating in part, quote, "It's a hell of a thing for all the first responders that went out to the scene and were there until daylight this morning. It's been a long night." He went on to say of Kendrick, quote, "He hasn't told us anything as far as a motive, and I don't know what motive he could give us that would justify what he did anyway." Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.